Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to get us underway with the semester so that we can learn how data analysis can help us answer social science research questions. So in this tutorial, you don't have to follow along. I just want to give a quick and dirty introduction to Stata and to the data analysis process without you actually having to go into the program just yet. So sit back and relax for a few minutes as we get our feet wet with Stata. So let's take a quick step back to your research methods course that presumably you've already taken. So what do sociologists do? They propose questions, or they ask questions about the real world and then try to use real world or empirical data to answer those questions. So a sociological type of question, research question, would be, do students who join more student organizations have more close friends on campus? So we might think that your social network on campus is larger if you are part of more student organizations. Of course, there are lots of other factors that might be associated both with joining student organizations and whether you have close friends. So we need to tease apart multiple factors in order to answer this research question. And how could we do this? Well, we could survey people, survey students, and ask them, how many organizations are you a part of? How many close friends do you have on campus? And then other questions that we think might be associated with these things. So for example, people who commute may not be able to join as many student organizations and may not have as many close friends on campus. So we might want to what's called control for whether the person commutes to school in an analysis of the association between organizations and close friends on campus. So a survey would help us to answer this question. The survey data set that I'm going to open in Stata momentarily is a hypothetical survey of several students that asks both of these questions as well as a few more. And then we need to analyze that survey data. So that's where this class comes in. We're going to learn how to analyze survey data in this class using the software that's called Stata. So big picture, what we're going to talk about throughout the semester and step through throughout the semester is the process of data analysis. So the very first thing, once we've decided on a research question and found a data set or a survey data set that can help us answer that question, is to learn about what that survey looks like. How was it collected? Who was sampled? What sampling method was used? And so on. So we want to read the survey description. The second step after we've read the survey description is getting your hands on the data set and opening it in Stata and getting to know what variables are in the data set, how many respondents are there, how are the variables coded, how many variables are there, how is missing data handled. We'll talk about these in more depth, but I'm just giving you a big broad overview. Third step is exploring the key variables of interest. So previously, we proposed this question: do students who join more student organizations have more close friends on campus? So I want to identify what the independent and dependent variables are. That's one of the things that we're going to learn in this class. Hopefully you've already learned this in methods, but we'll review. And then talk about how each variable is measured, what's called the level of measurement. Again, hopefully you've done this in methods class, but if not, we will review. And then the crux of our data analysis really begins with exploring descriptives about all of the variables that we are interested in, including both number of organizations the student is in, number of close friends that they have, whether they commute, and anything else we've identified as appropriate and relevant to this research question. Look at missing data, examine whether there are outliers in the data. Does it look like anyone just checked the boxes at random as they were answering the survey, or are the responses realistic? So this is a really major one, and we're going to spend a couple of weeks on step 3 and talking about all the elements of exploring variables. Step 4 is cleaning data and recoding variables as needed. So maybe we have some variables that are in a interval ratio level of measurement, and we can recode them to simplify them to be coded dichotomously, or 0 and 1. We'll talk about when you might do that and how to identify whether you need to. Next step is, once you've explored the variables of interest, cleaned your data, and these kind of go hand in hand. Step 3 and 4 happen sort of cyclically, back and forth. Once you explore a variable and then decide you need to recode or create a new one, then you look back and explore the new version of that variable. Then we move on to bivariate associations. So we would look at the raw association between number of organizations a student is in and number of friends that they have, as an example. So starting with the bivariate or two variable association, for example, the key dependent variable and the key independent variable. And then finally, at the very end of the semester, we'll talk about how do you control for, that is, how do you account for the fact that there are correlations among other variables that could be causing what's called a spurious association between your dependent and independent variable. This requires multivariable analyses. You've probably heard the word regression before, or linear regression, and that's as far as we're going to go in this class, is how do we analyze the association between multiple variables. All right, so before we actually get into Stata, take a look at where to download all of the data that we're going to be using for the textbook. Tutorials are available at this textbook's website. I suggest you download all of those Stata files. They are with the extension .dta and the codebooks from this website into a folder that is specifically for this class on your computer. And then once you've downloaded that data, don't move the folder, don't change the name of the folder, keep it where it is so that you can use what are called do files to call up your data in Stata. You'll learn a bit more about that in a little while. Everything else is available on Blackboard for any additional readings or Stata resources, including the Stata Getting Started do file, which I highly recommend you browse over, especially in the first couple of weeks, because this contains a lot of the syntax that we're going to use for the entire semester, and annotated, telling you what each line does, and you can use that as a reference. All right, so there are a couple of ways to open Stata if you are a Windows user, so note that I am a PC user. So all of the examples that you're going to be seeing are on a PC. So you can open up your Stata from your program menu and just click on Stata, or you can go directly to one of your data sets and double click on that data set in order to open up Stata and the data set at the same time, saving you a step. So here you'll notice what Stata data files look like. Their extension .dta, again, that is essentially the spreadsheet of the survey data. And that is in contrast to this .do, which is called a do file, which is where we keep our syntax, and that is the code that we write to tell the program what to do with a particular data set, so what analyses to run on it, for example. So again, as a reminder, you can always open the Stata Getting Started do file on Blackboard and take a look at the annotations there. And this is how we open up Stata. There are a couple of ways that I'll show you in just a moment, and you can click through the rest of these to learn a little bit about file paths as well. And here's a glossary of terms for anything that you didn't catch during the tutorial. All right, so I'm going to close the PowerPoint and get straight into Stata now. So I mentioned there are two ways to open Stata. You can go to your programs and open it from here, and that opens up the Stata program window without any data in it. So you'll notice there is a variable window. There is what's called the command window. This is where we type in commands that we want the program to run. And this is where variables will appear once I have a data set open. So I can open up the example data set by going to File, Open, or just clicking on the Open icon. Notice, as with other softwares, if you just hover over an icon, it will tell you what that icon does. And I'm going to use the example Stata data set that contains the hypothetical student survey we spoke about earlier. So remember, we said one question a social scientist might ask is, do students who join more student organizations have more close friends on campus? This is a hypothetical survey that might allow us to answer, or at least start answering that question. It probably doesn't contain some of the other important things that are associated both with joining student organizations and with the number of friends that you have. So here we have a data set that has a GPA variable. So we know the student's GPA, the number of organizations they're a part of, their satisfaction with social life on campus, the number of friends they have on campus, whether they live on campus or not, and the number of minutes that they commute to campus if they live off campus. How can I look at this data set? Here I just have the variable list. Well, one of the first commands we want to learn is browse. That will open up essentially a spreadsheet of the entire data set. If we just type browse and no variable names after, or no observation numbers after, then it will pull up the entire data set. So here we can see the variables listed in the columns, and these numbers along here are the respondent numbers. So we can see there are 10 people in this survey, and for each of them we have responses about their GPA, number of organizations, satisfaction with social life on a scale of 1 to 10, number of friends, whether they live on campus or not, and their commute times. So as an example, respondent 1 has a 2.8 GPA, is part of 5 organizations, is pretty satisfied with social life on campus. Maybe not surprisingly, they have a ton of friends, and they do live on campus, and therefore they have this dot for commute. This dot means that there is no response on this question, which makes sense because they live on campus, therefore they don't commute, and so they were not asked how many minutes does it take you to get to campus. So keep in mind that these dots mean the data are missing. The person didn't respond to this question. So we don't have missing data on any of these other variables, but for the commute variable we do. This is one of the things that we'll be talking about and one of the considerations in our analysis as we move on through the semester. Okay, so we can close out of here now that we have a better sense of the data set. Oh, and if you scroll down here, it gives you the data set properties, and you can see it told us there are 6 variables and 10 total observations. Even though some of those observations are missing on certain questions, there were 10 total respondents. So this is handy, you might imagine, when you start getting into dozens of variables and you can't count them all by hand. You can see also down at the bottom the number of variables and the number of observations in the data set. Excuse me. Okay, so we might also make a couple of other quick observations, which is that GPA is measured with decimal places. Number of organizations ranges from 0 to 5. Number of friends ranges from 0 to 12. So these are ratio or interval variables. Same with satisfaction. Whether they live on campus is coded dichotomously, 0 or 1, and that's a categorical variable. And number of minutes that they commute, we only have that for 3 people because only 3 people do not live on campus, is in number of minutes. Okay, so one of the first things I might be interested in is summarizing the number of organizations that someone is a part of. So on average, across our sample of 10 students, the average number of organizations they're a part of is 1.6, so a little over 1. And we don't want to round up, so we could say on average people are part of one organization with a standard deviation that is just as large as the mean, so 1.6 organizations with a range of 0 to 5. That's a busy person, whoever is part of 5 organizations. We might do the same for the number of friends. So in our question about whether students who are part of more organizations have a greater number of friends, our dependent variable is the number of friends that they have, and our independent variable is the number of organizations that they are a part of. So here we can summarize the average number of friends that these 10 respondents have, a number of close friends rather, almost 4 with a standard deviation of 3.7. Again, we have someone with 12 friends and some people that report they have 0 close friends on campus. Okay, and so we might also now be interested in the association between these two. So not just what are the mean number of friends or what are the mean number of organizations someone's a part of, but looking at whether there is an association, a bivariate association between these two. So we can type scatter to make a scatter plot, which again, will cover what these things mean in more depth as the semester progresses. We're going to make a scatter plot between organizations and friends, and that's going to allow us to see whether there is an apparent bivariate association. So do people who join more organizations have more friends? And actually, we probably want to switch axes here so that we have number of friends on the y-axis and number of organizations on the x-axis, and we can see a couple of people who are not part of organizations and don't have too many friends, and then at one organization we have more friends. Then there's someone who is part of 2 organizations but only has 1 close friend. Then we have a couple of people who are part of 3 organizations, and we're starting to get slightly higher in the number of friends. And then we have what may be an outlier up here who's part of 5 organizations and has 12 friends. We saw that respondent earlier. All right, so I hope this has given you a little bit of an idea of what the Stata platform looks like. What the command window looks like, the variable window, where you see the results pop up, how to open up a data set. And then the last thing that I want to introduce here, because we'll be using it as we move forward, is a do file. So until now I've been manually typing things into the command window, and then you can see that Stata will show the command line in white and then give us the results in these green and yellow font. It gives errors in red up here. But a better workflow, rather than using this command window, is to use what's called a do file, which I mentioned earlier. So how do we do that? We can click on Window, Do File Editor, and open a new do file editor. And I can copy and paste the data set, the command that opened up the data set, into the do file. And then I can paste these subsequent commands here as well. And I don't need to paste them, I could just type them directly here. I'm just giving you a quick overview of what the do file would look like. So by one click here, I can actually replicate what I've done So this is the browse command that pulls up the data editor. Can close out of that, and then I'll see that it ran the do file in which I told it to use this data set, the example stata data.dta file. Then I browsed the data. Then I asked it to summarize the friends variable and then summarize the orgs variable. So it did those things that I asked it to just by me highlighting and clicking on execute selection. You can imagine how this might be a time saver. If you have a project that you're working on over several days or weeks or months, you don't want to just type into the command window because there's no way to double check your work. Or if you need to recode a variable at some point during the project, you would have to manually redo all the subsequent analyses on that variable. Whereas if you do it in a do file, if you have the syntax all in a do file, it's very simple to recode the variable and then rerun all of the analyses on that variable simply by changing the information in the do file. And we save do files as we would anywhere else, and I can call this example stata data do, and I'll know that that goes along with my example stata data do file. All right, and then once I've saved that, I can close out of Stata. Notice if I, or rather note that if I close out of Stata, but I've changed the data set, if I've recoded variables, I want to save as so that I don't lose the changes that I've made. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was a helpful, quick introduction to Stata, and next time you'll be opening up the program and following along with me. Have a good one.